So, yes.
Well, you brought this up a couple minutes ago, and you didn't address it. So we have these primitive bestiality. Animals can't sing.
So my question is, what is my take on bestiality? I basically agree with you. So the question with bestiality and consent, is bestiality moral? And I actually think this is a somewhat complicated question. My main response is, yes, you're right, animals can't verbally consent. They cannot give enthusiastic verbal consent. If you're, there's this whole thing, a lot of us in the atheist community have been talking about issues of consent and gray areas of consent. How do you know because somebody's consenting? And a lot of what a lot of us are saying is, if you think you're in a gray area of consent, err on the side of caution, err on the side of, if you're not sure if somebody's consenting, ask them. But obviously we can't do that with animals, So yes, I do think that there are very profound ethical problems with having sex with animals because they can't verbally consent. You know what? Animals also can't verbally consent to being, have a saddle put on them and being ridden in a race. They can't verbally consent to being your pet. They can't verbally consent to being your service dog, and they certainly can't verbally consent to being killed and eaten. So I agree that there are moral issues having to do with bestiality, but I think that it's a little inconsistent, to say the least, to apply those moral issues just to sex and not to look at it to what is our relationship with animals in general. In fact, there was a documentary that came out a few years ago. It's called Zoo, and that's short for Zoophilia, which is the official word for the fetish of, having sexual desire for animals. And it was about this community of people who like to have sex with horses. And so they were discovered, the police discovered them, they arrested a bunch of the people, and they took the horse away, and in order to make sure that this could never happen again, they castrated the horse. Now, horses get castrated all the time. Horses get castrated all the time, it's not unusual. But the question I had, and the question that obviously the documentary filmmakers are trying to get you to ask is, why is it not okay for the horse to have sex? Why is it wrong for people to have sex with a horse because it can't verbally consent, but it's okay for us to cut off its balls? So I'm repeating myself here, but yes, I think there are serious ethical concerns about having sex with animals, but really, if we're going to look at that, we need to look at our entire relationship with animals.
Well, the golden retriever acts like she really likes it.
Yeah. And that's what people, and that's a joke, but in fact, people who do advocate for zoophilia, people who are zoophiliacs or who think that it's morally acceptable, say animals they can't give verbal consent, but if a dog doesn't like what's happening, it's going to walk away. And that's true for almost, if the dog doesn't like the food you're giving it, it's going to walk away, and if the dog doesn't like the sex you're offering, it's going to walk away. I personally think that that's complicated because dogs are trained to want to please us, and they're trained to want to make us happy, and so that makes that a very gray area in my opinion. But
the consent would also apply, wouldn't it, then to a potential partner who's intoxicated?
Yes, and I'm glad you brought that up. As a matter of fact, there's been, again, a lot of conversation in the atheist community and other communities about the question of consent. This is away from bestiality now and back to people, about the question of consent with consent and alcohol. Because a lot of sexual assault, statistics really very clearly show a strong correlation between sexual assault and alcohol use. Sexual assault is more likely to happen when there's alcohol use, both on the part of the assaulter and on the part of the victim. And so there's sort of been this conversation about, well, how much alcohol, if you're going to have a guideline that you shouldn't have sex with somebody who's too drunk to consent. And yes, I absolutely think that. You don't have sex with somebody who's too drunk to consent. Consent is a cornerstone of sexual morality. And there's lots of things that undermine consent. Have somebody being your boss undermines consent. Somebody having a gun to your head obviously undermines consent. But you being so intoxicated that you can't really make a decision, that also undermines consent. And so there's all these kind of conversations about, well, how drunk is too drunk? And one of the answers that Rebecca Watson gave was, you know what, if you're not sure, if you think you're in a gray area, err on the side of not raping somebody. If you think if you're not sure whether somebody is too drunk to really consent to have sex with you, don't have sex with them. Because the consequences if you don't have sex with them are, you know what, you didn't get to have sex that night. The consequences if you do are as if you might have raped them. And that's way worse. And there's something that another friend of mine pointed out, because a lot of people were saying, well, again, you know, gray areas, blah, blah, blah. They were saying, you know what, if your entire sex life is conducted in this moral gray area, in this murky moral gray area where you're not really sure whether the people that you're having sex with are capable of consenting, you seriously need to reevaluate your sex life. You know, so, rant over.